Luca Klein was not your average sound engineer. For starters, he never found it odd to spend his weekends not hiking in the mountains or binging the latest Netflix series, but instead, listening to the hum of city buildings. In fact, he would often sit in the bustling heart of downtown, sipping overpriced coffee, and bask in the strange symphony of concrete, glass, and steel. It wasn't that Luca was crazy, he was just a man who had a gift, one that no one seemed to understand. From the moment he'd learned to walk, he could hear things others couldn't. Not voices, not whispers from beyond the grave, but the unique frequencies emitted by everything around him. He could hear the subtle vibrations of a skyscraper stretching beneath the weight of gravity, the faint hum of electricity pulsing through the city's power grid, and even the delicate sway of a bridge in the wind. But it wasn't just about listening. Luca could feel it all. His sense of resonance, he called it his tuning ability, let him synchronize with the vibrations of any building, vehicle, or piece of machinery. When he touched something, he could understand how it was made, what it was doing, and sometimes, even what it was feeling. It was like tuning a guitar, but instead of plucking strings, Luca adjusted the very air, aligning the frequencies until everything hummed in perfect harmony. To the untrained eye, Luca was simply an eccentric. He worked as a sound engineer, mostly for small architectural firms, helping to fine-tune the acoustics of new buildings. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But in his own little world, he was comfortable. Until that morning. It was the first time in his life that the resonance was wrong. Wrong in a way that sent a shiver up his spine. He had just finished his coffee and was walking down the street, his fingers lightly brushing against the sleek exterior of a luxury electric car parked in front of the cafe. The familiar hum pulsed against his fingertips, and he felt an odd dissonance, a slight warble, like a note off key. Luca frowned. The car's engine wasn't even running, but there it was. A vibration, thick and discordant, and it seemed to grow louder with each passing moment. He stopped in his tracks, staring at the chrome-plated vehicle, as if it had just whispered his name. He glanced around the street. People were oblivious, chatting on their phones or walking briskly by. The city, as usual, was a cacophony of sound and motion. But for Luca, the hum was increasing, reverberating off the buildings, and then, without warning, a window in the high-rise across the street began to rattle. Luca blinked, confused. That wasn't normal. The building was new, just finished last year. It was supposed to be solid, quiet. But no. The vibrations were not only detectable, they were growing in intensity. As if the building itself was alive. Pulsing. Then came the real surprise. The skyscraper began to sway. It wasn't a dramatic movement, no wild oscillations, but enough to make Luca's pulse quicken. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. Something was seriously off. Is this normal? Luca muttered to himself, as though the buildings around him could answer. Of course, no one else seemed to notice. He'd been a part of this city for years, and never once had he felt anything like this. It was as if the resonance of the entire neighborhood had suddenly gone rogue. Luca instinctively touched the car again, hoping to focus his thoughts. But the vibration was now practically unbearable. The electric hum felt jagged, biting into his skin, pulling at his bones. It was not an instrument he recognized. Not machinery. Not mechanical noise. He stepped back, unsure what to do next, and then it hit him, a thunderous crack from the high-rise across the street. Something had broken loose. Pieces of concrete fell from the building, scattering to the ground below. The vibration. It was not an accident. Someone had tampered with the resonance. Someone had intentionally set this all in motion. Luca's mind raced, but his body moved faster. He darted down the street, instinctively moving away from the skyscraper as chunks of concrete shattered the pavement behind him. The vibrations were like a living thing now, feeding off the energy of the city, working in tandem with every building, every bridge. His senses were overloaded. He ducked into an alley, leaning against the cool brick of a forgotten warehouse. He was trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming pulse that was now coursing through him. For a split second, the world around him seemed to fade, the sound of the city growing muffled, and then, the building in front of him groaned. Luca raised his hands, palms outstretched, closing his eyes for a moment. If he could just tune in, if he could focus. His fingers vibrated with the energy of the city. The building before him quivered, responding to his command, as if asking for his guidance. Calm down, Luca thought, willing himself to concentrate. Calm down. The vibrations softened, and the world snapped back into focus. The building's hum settled into a less threatening tone, but Luca knew this was just the beginning. What had just happened? Why had the resonance gone rogue? Later that day, as Luca stood in his tiny apartment, staring at his blueprints and research notes, a small flashing light on his phone caught his attention. It was an alert from the city's seismic monitoring system. The readings were insane. Buildings, bridges, and tunnels were all reporting abnormal vibrations and not the usual daily shifts. These were destructive frequencies, spreading across the city like an invisible web. Luca's stomach dropped. The vibrations weren't just in one place, they were everywhere. This was no accident. Someone had hijacked the city's infrastructure. And from the looks of it, they were using its resonance to weaponize the entire urban landscape. Luca needed answers, and he needed them fast. It wasn't long before he remembered something that had slipped his mind earlier in the day: the Central Library. He had worked there just a week ago, adjusting the acoustics of a new lecture hall. But when he touched the walls of the building, he had sensed something strange. A discordant energy, as if the structure itself had been altered. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, everything was coming together. The city's most famous landmarks, its heart and soul, had been transformed into vibrational weapons. Luca wasn't just a passive observer anymore. The city needed him. He needed to find out who was behind this madness, and how to stop it before the city tore itself apart. Later that evening, Luca found himself at the steps of the city's iconic Central Library, bathed in the golden hue of streetlights. The building loomed before him, a symbol of knowledge, history, and now, according to his theory, a ticking time bomb. He reached out with his senses, letting his fingers brush the cold marble of the steps. Almost immediately, he felt the strange hum. The very air seemed to vibrate in a pattern he couldn't quite understand. It was as if the library was speaking to him, whispering a secret only he could hear. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Luca stepped forward, his heart pounding. He had no idea what he would find inside, but one thing was certain: the resonance of the city was in the hands of someone dangerous. And he was the only one who could stop it. Luca pushed open the heavy, creaking door to the Central Library. The scent of old paper and polished wood flooded his senses, but there was something else too, something metallic, like the tang of ozone in the air. The hum was faint but unmistakable, threading through the quiet halls like an invisible current. The library had always been one of Luca's favorite places in the city, a refuge of stillness amidst the chaotic hum of modern life. But tonight, that stillness felt unnatural. He could almost feel the structure itself holding its breath, as though it knew something terrible was about to happen. Luca moved deeper into the building, following the low vibrations that seemed to pulse through the floor beneath his feet. His fingers twitched at his sides, drawn to the sound, the feel of it, even though he knew that something wasn't right. He could already hear the subtle vibrations of the library's walls, their resonance shifted and misaligned, echoing with an unfamiliar, almost malevolent energy. He rounded the corner toward the main reading room, and there, standing in the center of the large, vaulted space, was a figure. He froze. "Who's there?" Luca called out, his voice barely above a whisper, swallowed by the vastness of the room. The figure didn't move. It was a woman, tall and angular, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was obscured by the shadow of a nearby column, but there was something unnerving about the stillness of her posture, like a statue that could come to life at any moment. "Don't be afraid," the woman's voice rang out, smooth and calm, yet laced with a quiet authority. "I'm not here to harm you." Luca hesitated, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. There was a familiarity to her voice, but something about it unsettled him. I could say the same, Luca replied cautiously, taking a step closer. He instinctively reached out with his senses, letting the vibrations of the space wash over him. As he focused, he felt a strange surge as though the air itself was alive, vibrating with purpose. The resonance was far more intense than before. But not just that. It was aligned. Ordered. Someone was controlling it. "You're a tuner, aren't you?" the woman asked, her gaze sharp and penetrating, even from the shadows. "I've been waiting for you." Luca's heart skipped a beat. How does she know that? "What do you want from me?" he demanded, instinctively bracing himself against whatever was coming. The dissonant hum of the building seemed to sharpen, like a tuning fork vibrating too loudly. The woman stepped forward, her silhouette emerging from the shadows. She was tall, dressed in black, her eyes almost glowing in the dim light. "My name is Olivia Reed," she said, her voice low but steady. "I'm an engineer, just like you. And I'm trying to save this city from what's coming." Luca stared at her, his mind racing. Save it? From what? She walked slowly toward him, her shoes barely making a sound on the marble floor. "From the resonance." "Resonance?" Luca repeated, the word unfamiliar, though it carried a weight he couldn't quite place. "Who are they?" "They're a group of people who believe in the power of resonance to control, to reshape, to dominate," Olivia said, her tone growing colder, more urgent. "And they've taken control of the city's infrastructure. They've turned it into a weapon. The buildings, the bridges, the subways, they've all been re-engineered to vibrate in unison. At the right frequency, they can level entire districts, cripple the government, and change the course of the future. I've seen their plans, Luca. And they're getting closer to activating the core resonance." Luca felt the blood drain from his face. No. He hadn't imagined it. This wasn't just some malfunction, some random glitch in the system. The city was under attack, and he was somehow caught in the middle of it. "I don't understand," Luca said, his voice shaky. "Why me? Why would they come to someone like me?" Olivia's eyes locked onto his. "Because you're the only one who can stop them. You feel the resonance, don't you? You understand how to navigate the vibrations of this city. You've already helped shape its infrastructure. You can disrupt it." Luca swallowed hard. Disrupt it? He could barely stop the hum of a single building, let alone the entire city. "I can't do this," he whispered. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who can hear things others can't." Olivia stepped closer, her voice soft but insistent. "But you can do this. You've been trained your entire life to understand resonance. You just don't know it yet." Luca shook his head, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can stop something like this. The city's entire infrastructure it's all been turned into a weapon. I don't even know where to begin." Olivia's expression softened. "I understand. It's a lot to take in. But you're not alone in this. I know where the core resonance node is. It's hidden in a government facility downtown, beneath the old archives. That's where they're planning to activate the network, and once they do, it will be too late." Luca felt the urgency in her voice, but he couldn't shake the feeling of doubt gnawing at him. He had no experience fighting shadowy organizations or dismantling citywide sonic weapons. He was just an ordinary man with an extraordinary ability. But what other choice did he have? The city his home was being torn apart by forces beyond his understanding, and only he had the key to stop it. "I don't know if I can do this," Luca said, his voice thick with uncertainty. Olivia placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You can. We can do it together." Luca stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't asking for a miracle. She was asking him to trust in his ability, his gift, even if he didn't fully understand it. And somehow, despite every doubt in his mind, he knew she was right. he had to try. "All right," he said, his voice steadying. "Let's do it." They made their way through the darkened halls of the library, and as they walked, Olivia explained more about the resonance. They were an underground group of rogue engineers, architects, and physicists who had studied resonance for decades, pushing its limits and harnessing its power to create a new world order. At first, they had been a small group, isolated, working in secret. But over the years, they had infiltrated key positions in the city's infrastructure, slowly bending the city to their will. It started with small projects, Olivia explained. Adjustments to building designs, soundproofing, energy grids. But as they gained more power, they began reworking entire districts, turning the city into a giant resonance machine. They've been preparing for this moment for years. Luca listened, his mind racing as he tried to piece together everything she was saying. The resonance he had felt earlier, the strange, out-of-place hum, was the beginning of the resonance plan. They had engineered the city to vibrate in a way that could be harnessed as a weapon. And now, they were getting ready to set it off. "So, what's the plan?" Luca asked, trying to focus. "How do we stop them?" Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him. "We have to reach the resonance node before they do. It's a facility deep beneath the city, hidden in the old archives. That's where they've been channeling all the energy. Once we get inside, we can shut down the system and stop the resonance from activating the core." Luca nodded, a chill running down his spine. They were racing against time. The fate of the city rested in their hands. If they didn't succeed, the destruction would be catastrophic. They had to stop the resonance before they triggered the ultimate resonance, a wave of energy so powerful it could level the entire city. But as Luca followed Olivia through the library's darkened corridors, a sense of dread settled over him. He had always known his gift was something more than a curiosity. But now, faced with the weight of what was at stake, he couldn't help but wonder, was he really ready for this? Could he stop a citywide disaster with nothing more than his ability to feel the vibrations of the world around him? He didn't know the answer. All he knew was that if he failed, the city he loved would crumble under the weight of its own resonance, and that was a price he couldn't afford to pay. They moved quickly through the dimly lit halls of the library, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness, each footfall sending a brief, jarring vibration through Luca's bones. The entire structure was trembling now, the resonance growing stronger by the minute, like the pull of a distant earthquake. It was as though the library itself was in tune with the dangerous symphony unfolding around them, and it was just the beginning. Luca's thoughts raced as they made their way toward the exit. Every sense he had was on high alert, the faintest pulse of energy in the air sending a shock of recognition through him. This wasn't just some abstract threat. This wasn't some scientific experiment gone wrong. The resonance weren't just trying to manipulate the city's vibrations for the sake of knowledge or progress. They were weaponizing it. They were building a system of destruction so powerful it could tear the heart out of the entire metropolis. They passed the last rows of bookshelves and reached the main exit, where Olivia stopped to turn and face Luca. Her expression was hard, determined, but there was something else in her eyes, something like a warning. "You need to understand something before we get to the facility," Olivia said, her voice low but urgent. "This isn't just about stopping them. It's about you, Luca. You're the only one who can reverse the resonance. They've been studying people like you for years. People who can feel the frequencies, who can manipulate them. You're not just some passive observer. You're the key." Luca's throat tightened as she spoke. He had known his gift was something more, something that set him apart from others. But to hear her say it so plainly, to be told that the entire fate of the city rested on him, it felt like an unbearable weight settling on his chest. "I'm not sure I understand," he stammered. "I mean, I can hear it, but..." "No," she cut him off sharply. "You can do more than hear it. You can control it. You've always been able to, Luca. You've just never been forced to confront the scale of it." Her voice softened. "This is your moment. You've been training for this, whether you knew it or not. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and inevitable. Luca didn't have time to process them fully. He couldn't. He had to move forward, or everything he knew, everything he loved would be gone. He nodded stiffly, pushing past his rising panic. Where's the facility? Olivia's gaze flickered briefly toward the street outside. Just a few blocks. There's an entrance hidden in the old city archives, beneath the streets. The resonants have access through the maintenance tunnels. We'll need to stay low and move quickly. If they catch wind of us, got it, Luca said, his voice firming. There was no time to waste. They slipped out into the night, the cool air of the city hitting them like a jolt. The streets were strangely quiet, an eerie stillness that matched the hum of the world around him. The buildings themselves seemed to breathe in unison, their vibrations now blending into a low, constant drone, like a massive engine idling beneath the city's surface. Luca felt it in his bones. He had to focus. He had to control it. There was no room for doubt, no room for fear. They crossed the street quickly, ducking into an alley that wound between two tall office buildings. The shadows swallowed them up, but Luca could still feel the hum. He could feel the buildings themselves, their vibrations syncing with each other, pulsing like a heartbeat. They weren't just structures anymore. They were part of something much bigger, a mechanism built with precision to create a force he couldn't even fathom. This way, Olivia whispered, pulling him toward a heavy metal door tucked between two service buildings. She produced a small electronic device from her pocket and pressed it to the door's keypad. There was a brief flash of light, followed by a low click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. They stepped inside, and Olivia led the way down the stairs, her footsteps sure and steady. As they descended, the air grew cooler, the faint scent of oil and concrete mixing with the metallic tang of underground pipes. The walls hummed not just from the city above, but from something deeper, something older. This was where the resonants had worked their manipulations. Luca's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the bottom of the stairs, and he instinctively placed a hand on the stone wall, seeking comfort from the vibrations he could feel beneath his fingertips. He could sense the subtle disturbances in the frequency, but it wasn't the natural pulse of the earth or the city. It was twisted. There was a pattern to it, but it was distorted, fractured. Do you feel it? Olivia asked, her voice tight. Luca didn't need to answer. He could feel it in his gut, a sickening pull that tugged at him, telling him they were getting close to the epicenter of the resonance operation. They rounded a corner, and before them stood a massive reinforced door, covered in rusted bolts and a faintly glowing keypad. This is it, Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Once we go in, we can't turn back. The resonance will know we're here. Luca nodded, his mind sharp despite the anxiety clawing at him. He could feel the pulse of the facility beneath his feet, the deep, steady thrum that seemed to permeate everything around them. He pressed his fingers to the door, focusing all his energy on the hum that resonated through his fingertips. With a slow breath, he began to listen to it. The vibrations were chaotic at first, layered with dissonant frequencies, as though someone had taken all the natural rhythms and twisted them. He concentrated, shutting out the fear, and gradually, he found the pattern, the key. There it was, the faintest thread of coherence buried deep within the noise. It was as if the door itself were a musical composition, and Luca was its conductor, pulling the right notes into place. The door's hum shifted, ever so slightly, and with a soft hiss, the bolts unlocked. Go, Olivia urged, stepping forward as the door creaked open. They stepped into a dimly lit corridor, the air thick with a strange metallic scent. The walls were lined with pipes and cables, each one buzzing with energy, feeding into the heart of the facility. At the end of the hallway, Luca could see the flickering lights of a large central chamber, where the main resonance node would be. They moved toward it, their footsteps muffled by the hum that reverberated through the walls. As they reached the chamber door, Luca felt the vibrations shift again, sharper, more intense. Someone was already here. Stay close, Olivia whispered, reaching for a small, handheld device from her pocket. It glowed faintly, a signal jammer to block the resonance communications. They couldn't afford to let anyone know they were coming. Luca didn't respond. He didn't need to. He could feel it, the resonance had begun to shift. The frequencies were moving faster now, churning like an incoming storm. And somewhere, deep inside the facility, he could sense it, the heartbeat of the weapon. They pushed open the door, and Luca's stomach churned as they stepped into the heart of the resonance node. The chamber was a maze of high-tech equipment, massive consoles, and pulsating generators, all of them feeding into a central array. A massive crystal-like structure at the center of the room glowed with a deep, violet light, sending ripples of energy through the AIGirl. At the far end of the room stood a figure. A man, his back turned to them, staring at the array with a look of absolute concentration. Luca felt the hairs on his neck stand on end. He had no idea who this man was, but one thing was certain: he was the one pulling the strings. "Welcome," the man's voice rang out, cold and detached, as if he had been expecting them all along. "I wondered how long it would take for someone to get here." Luca tensed, instinctively placing his hands at his sides, ready to reach for the resonance if he needed to. "Who are you?" Olivia demanded, stepping forward. The man turned slowly, a small, thin smile curling at the corner of his lips. His eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating intelligence. "My name is Arlo King. And I'm the one who's going to change everything." Before Luca could react, the entire room seemed to tremble. The hum from the resonance array intensified, becoming a violent, pulsating force. The city itself seemed to scream in response, the vibrations shaking the very foundation of the earth, and in that moment, Luca realized just how far the resonance had gone and how much of a threat they truly posed.